Well, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Kenny stole my opening line about 20 grandchildren, but of those, 14 are boys, but they're all rugby boys, not football, or most of them anyway. And I have to say, one part of the family are all sitting along the back there, so I'm very grateful for them back there, and I know they come here sometimes anyway. So it's lovely to see them as well. I am going to tell you a bit this morning about our story, about what we do, and about really why we do it. Uh, Mercy in Action. 30 years ago, over 30 years ago, my brother, who was an Elim pastor, was invited to take a team out to the Philippines, just, 2-week trip. He loved it. He started going every year. He took John 1 year. He took me the next year. I then jumped the queue and went again the next year. And then we were invited to go out ourselves, and we took a team. This is back in 1995 when we were very young. uh, while we were there, we were out one evening, and we were with the pastor, and we met 5 little boys. They came running over, and they didn't speak English. We didn't speak Cebuano, but we could sort of tell they were asking for food. And the pastor said, I can't give them any. We're already working with so many children, but these boys haven't eaten for 3 days. There were 5 of them. They were about 10, 11, 12 years old. And we were by a little cafe, and so, of course, we took them in, and we bought 2 chickens and 10 portions of rice, and they had 2 portions of rice each, and they had the chicken. And at the end of the meal, they wrapped the barbecue chicken up in the banana leaves it had been served in, and we just said, wow, oh, aren't they tidy? How polite of them. And they went, no, that's what they'll eat tomorrow, the bones. So we agreed to feed them again the next day when there were 7 of them, and the next day when there were 9 of them. And by the end of the week, I think there were 12 boys and 1 girl. And we agreed with the church that if we could send £40 a month, they could feed them 3 times a week. And we thought, we haven't got £40, but we can get that. And we did. People were very generous. And we really thought that was the end of it. And what drew us to these boys is important, really, because when we left them that first night, I turned to John and said, all I saw was our 9-year-old son at home, who's blonde and blue-eyed, said all I could see, the 5 faces to me were just the faces of our son. And he had seen exactly the same thing. And we knew God was calling us. Thank you so much. Thank you. And as the years went on, it was then like, oh, there's a few more children, and could we rent a house for them? And then, oh, we've got 120 children who need to go to school this year. And we were like, no, we cannot do that. We don't have that sort of money. Let's just stick with what we're doing. And we met a friend, actually in Milsom Street, and he was like, oh, you two still mucking around in the Philippines? We're like, yeah. Said, oh, they've asked us to send £5,000 so they can send 120 children to school this year, but that's ridiculous. And he went, that's utterly ridiculous. You can't do that. And we said, no, we're going home to fax them to say we can't do it. And we got home, and we had a phone call, and this guy said, I've got a cheque for £5,000 on my desk. And he continued that for several years so that we could send them to school. One of those that we sent to school was one of these very first boys who are called Ray. And he was actually quite quiet. He was never any trouble, was he, He was a good boy. Sort of got lost in the crowd, really. Years later, our daughter Emily, who we foolishly said she could go out for 3 months when she was 17, she came back as a 37-year-old with a husband and 6 children. And he ended up in the same city that by then we had moved to and were working in, Emily and Tim, were heading it up there. And he said, could he meet up with them? And Emily phoned me and said, I think he maybe needs to borrow some money. I was like, well, just meet up and see what happens. He's never, ever asked for anything. So she went to see him, and he said, actually, I'm engaged to a girl who'd also been on our schooling program. He said, and we're getting married, and we want to ask you to be guest of honour at our wedding. And I always say, if all we've done in the last 30 years was just for him, it's been worth every penny. He has a very good job now. His wife has a good job. They've got 2 children. They've got their own home. Their children are not reliant on the kindness of strangers buying them a meal or on somebody sponsoring them. We now have over 500 children at school in the Philippines. Every single one of them receive a hot meal every day, their bags, their books, the services of social workers, teachers, counsellors, any way we can help families stay together. The children, 30 years on, I'm in touch with some of them now through Facebook, which is lovely, some of the original ones. They're teachers, they're social workers, they work in local government. Their children aren't queuing up for food, and that's what it's been about for us, is that change. Alongside all of this, we have 3 residential homes for children. They're not orphanages. They're not really children's homes. They're family units. They have a maximum of 10 children each, probably not that anymore. 1 for the girls, 1 for the younger boys, 1 for the older boys. And again, they are amazing. Hi, Xavier. And I'd like to tell you about one of our girls from there, who again, I'll call her Susie. Susie came to us, I think she was 8 or 9 years old. She had both her parents, she had a mum. Mum could not keep her safe. Mum's lifestyle was such that Susie was not safe at home, and it was agreed she would come into care with us. She still saw Mum quite regularly and still does. Susie, I think, is now 18, 19, Emily? Yep, she knows where I'm going. She hadn't been to school when she came to us, so we had our own little school where the kids could catch up and then slot back in. Thanks, I really needed that help, Zeze. That's good. Moral support, that's all right. I'm happy if he is. Xavier is our youngest grandchild. And she caught up at school, she went through school, she moved on to an organisation where we pay for her to be there, but they work with older girls. We can't keep our young people after they're 18, but she's in a wonderful place now. And they've contacted us to say she's graduated high school. Yes, hooray. And they'd signed her up to go and do textiles at college so she could become a seamstress, earn a living that way. And she's been to them this last month and said, actually, I want to be an architect. And they've been back to the school, they've looked at her grades, and actually, she has got it, she can be an architect. What a difference for her, what a difference. So we've agreed, it's way out of our budget, but she's worth it, she's worth it. It's going to cost us an extra £4,000 over the next 5 years, but she is worth every penny of that, because how will that change not just her life, her mother's life, her siblings' lives, her cousins' lives, her whole village's lives will be changed because of that. I'll try and keep an eye on the time. As well as all of that, we have a church out there, which really Emily should be telling this. She could tell you 1,000 stories, way better than I could. A church that grew out of 5 or 6 mums meeting together. I think Verity was a baby when Emily started a little toddler group, and these mums were from the roughest part of town. I believe their village, translated in English, was called the Village of Thieves, and that's where they all lived and did their best to bring up their children. Most of these women now are home group leaders, church leaders. We don't call it a church out there because we'd have to be registered and employ all sorts of other people and have all sorts of other things going on. We just call it a community group, but it's church. It's church. And these women look after each other so, so well. They're there for each other all the time. You're too slow, Tim, too slow. It's always good to have a sideshow as well, I find. We work with street kids, which is where we started. Street kids are at the heart of everything we do. And not just because God told us to, because in my own way, I was a bit of a street kid. My mum was a very young single mum with 4 children. My dad was an alcoholic. He wasn't in my life from when I was 5. My brother and I would just roam the streets in the holidays and at weekends. It was good. He became an Elim pastor. It was... and, you know, I was the child at school who fainted in assembly because I hadn't had breakfast. I would stay off school because I didn't have shoes to wear, all of that sort of thing. And so I know the pain of mothers who can't feed their children and can't care for them properly. And I also know the generosity of strangers who helped us. And I know the love of God that rescued me from it. And that's a lot of what motivates me. John, on the other hand, grew up as an only child with everything he could ever want. And it's taken me 47 years to try and thrash that out of him. Sorry, I do have notes somewhere. Oh, I've done my stories. Look at that. Before I tell you what we do here in the UK and around the world in other places, I just want to read a scripture to you. And it's one you'll know well. It's Luke 4, verse 18 to 21. And it's when Jesus went to the synagogue and he said, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him, and he began by saying to them, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." My O-level RE told me the gospel meant good news. Good news. Jesus came. His story, everything is about good news. And there, it's about good news for the poor, for the oppressed, for those in prison, in whatever that looks like. That's not behind man-made bars always, is it? And so for me, if it's not good news for the poor, it's not the gospel. I don't know what it is, but it's not the gospel. It has to be good for the poor in whatever way people are poor. And sadly, now more than ever, we have the poor. We don't have to go out to the Philippines. In 1995, I think the one food bank in Bath had just started at Genesis. There was no need for anything else. I think there are something like 16 in Bath now giving food in different ways. We never could have dreamt of that. And that's Bath. We're by no means the poorest city, but we have pockets of extreme poverty in Bath. So that's where we're coming from. Is it good news? Is it good news for the people we're trying to reach, or are we just giving them some rules and regulations to live by? What we've discovered in the Philippines with our bunch of women, we haven't had to show them what's wrong and not right. As they've become closer to Jesus, they found that out for themselves. There was one time that was very funny. They were giving testimonies, and one woman, I think actually it was Elim, said, "Oh, my daughter knocked over the boiling oil in our house," and their house would be half the size of this platform. And she really, really screamed, but God, somehow she wasn't hurt. And somebody else said, "Oh, I heard her scream. I thought you were beating her again." She went, "I don't beat my children anymore. Who do you think I am?" But that change had just happened, hadn't it, Emily? That they'd gone from one way of living to another way of giving thanks to God for his protection and being horrified that anybody would think they'd hurt their children, whereas it was pretty common before that. But again, these women's are part of their community. That woman in particular, she just works for the community now, doesn't she? She's actually not employed by us, but by the local council, working into the community, bringing about change. Here in the UK, 6 years ago, one of our daughters, so we are a family doing this. When I talk about I or we, it's Mercy in Action, it's the family, it's all the wonderful people who have supported and prayed for us. I see Vera and Val here this morning, and you're part of our journey, and for that I'm really, really grateful. And I believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's about the generations together. It's not, people say to me, "Are you going to retire?" I go, "Nope." God hasn't told me to yet. We're working together, separately but together. You wouldn't want to work with your mother too much, I get that. Or with your children, come to that. But we've all got our bits that we do. So our daughter Laura, had always had a dream to set up some safe houses for young mums facing homelessness. And she had that dream from when she was 16 or 17. And again, 20 years later, she was able to put that into practice. So in Bath, there are 3 houses for young mums facing homelessness. There's one down in Wells and one in Trowbridge. And she started working with Fair Share, who many of you would probably know the name. They distribute excess food, unwanted food near the end of its date that might otherwise go to landfill. And they then suggested to us that we might like to start a pantry-style food bank in Bath. And we were just like, never thought of that. I've got no idea. Let's give it a try. We had 30 families eventually coming to us. This was in the May. The following March, we went into lockdown, and we knew then what God had called us to do. And we were serving 190 families a week. There were just John and I tearing around the city, picking up food from every Marks and Spencer's, Lidl. There was just food everywhere, and people phoning and saying, "I've got food you can have," and Fair Share, and there was government food available, and a whole load of volunteers. We thought at the end of lockdown that it would go back to our 30 families. We are now on a regular 120 families in Bath, 40 down in Radstock, and another 65 in Oxford. The need is just growing and growing all the time. We also give free clothes, household goods, furniture to families in need because of our shops. And thank you for anyone who donates or shops there. You'll see them all around the city, but we actually have 38 shops around the country. And that's how we fund a lot of our work. We've got amazing sponsors who sponsor kids, people who fundraise, people who give. But a lot comes from the profit from our shops, which we couldn't do without. There are families in Bath who do not have beds. There are families in Bath without curtains at the window, without carpets. One mum came in one week and she said, "Oh, you've got some saucepans, can I have one?" My saucepan broke. The handle fell off it. She had one saucepan. We almost have a riot if we've got towels to give away because people don't have towels, people don't have sheets. They'll come in and say, "Oh, we've lost, the cutlery seems to have disappeared." Well, teaspoons, they go in the school bag and you never see them again, don't they? But families find themselves without the very, very basics needed in life. We're working now into Bristol where we're partnering with at least two organisations. We're working with a housing association that works with their worker who's responsible for domestic violence situations, and she works with mums from Bridgewater up to the Cotswolds. And she's in our warehouse every week just getting bags of clothes for the kids, school bags, coats, just all the basics, pyjamas, underwear. We work with asylum seekers, really anybody who finds themselves in need. We're able to step in and help, and we have amazing people doing that with us. We're looking to expand all the time, and I think what we've realised in this last year is it's about collaboration, because other people have got what we haven't, and we can make what we've got go much further by working with other people. Our pantry in Bath, if there's anybody here looking for a job, our wonderful manager has just left to become a full-time foster carer, and we do have a vacancy there. If you're interested, look on our website or on Indeed, because I need somebody very, very special in there. It's a special place, and it needs the right person in there to make sure we're serving our families in the very best way we can, and to express the love of God to them in practical ways, because that gives us the right to do other things as well for them. I believe with all my heart that as Christians we are called to care for the poor. I know we've an election this week. One of my favourite politicians who's retired now is Gordon Brown. And I'm sure you love him as a fellow Scot. About a year ago, he was speaking somewhere, and he said, we have to be very, very worried about a country where the food banks and charities have become the welfare service, because the state is no longer providing what they should be providing. We get calls from welfare services in Bath asking if we can provide things that even 2-3 years ago they would have done. Historically, it was the church and Christian philanthropists who set up the children's homes, the soup kitchens, all the help. Almost all of it came from the church and philanthropists. When the welfare state came into being, the government said, yes, you can go away now. You can go back to your prayer meetings. We don't need you anymore. And made it very difficult. You know, they started everything, and over the years it shut down. There are no youth groups anymore. There are no local youth groups. I would say, yes, the state has a responsibility towards its people, but so does the church. And the state has stolen that mantle off the church, but they don't want it anymore. And I would say, church, it's time to take it back. It's time to take it back and get out there and start serving people. And yes, some people will come in lost off the streets. I was one. I found myself in a Baptist church where I heard the gospel and gave my life to Jesus. But that is unusual. From there, my brother took me to this crazy Elim church around the corner because there was a very pretty girl there who he married, and they went off to Bible college together. I went back to the Baptist church. But it is what we're called to do. Jesus said it so clearly, and we sang it this morning. I wrote those words down. I can't see them anymore, but we sang, you free every captive and break every chain. That's the gospel. That's good news. That's good news for each of us. We're all captive to something anyway, and we need that continual freedom and good news of the gospel to help us in every way, whether it's healing, whether it's salvation, whether it's salvation for our children and to see them come back to God, whatever it is, for provision. but for everybody. I believe we are called to bring the good news of Jesus so that his kingdom will continue to grow even in these dark days we find ourselves in. And so I really want to leave you with that. Thank you for having me this morning.